My name is Sarah. I'm 29 years old, and the moment my mother-in-law branded me a useless, barren woman in front of the entire family, I knew precisely how I was going to respond. It was Thanksgiving 2022, and all of us were squeezed into David's childhood house, the suffocatingly beige colonial where every wall was cluttered with photographs displayed like altars to Margaret's vision of the perfect family. I had been in the kitchen, doing my best to be helpful, though Margaret had spent the last 3 years reminding me in countless ways that nothing I did would ever measure up for her treasured son. "Sarah, sweetheart," she cooed. Her voice dipped in that syrupy southern charm she always weaponized before delivering something cruel. "Why don't you stick to setting the table? Cooking requires instincts that only real mothers possess." The room froze. David's sister, Jessica, kept her eyes glued to her phone. His father cleared his throat, muttering something about checking the score. And David, my husband of 3 years, just stood silently, slicing the turkey like an automaton, pretending he hadn't heard a thing. But I had heard it, every syllable. I heard the emphasis on real mothers. I heard the sting of every failed attempt, every negative pregnancy test, every fertility appointment she somehow always seemed to know about despite us never telling her. I heard the weight of 3 years of snide remarks about my career, about how I was supposedly too selfish to give her grandchildren. "Margaret," I said evenly, setting the gravy boat down with deliberate care, "I think you may be confused about something." Her lips curved into that smile of hers, the one that looked warm from afar but revealed its sharp edges when up close. "Oh, confused about what, dear?" "About who in this family is actually barren." The kitchen went so still that even the sounds of the football game in the living room seemed to stop. Margaret's complexion shifted from pale to crimson to a dark, blotchy purple. "Excuse me." I reached into my purse, pulling out a manila envelope I had been carrying for 2 weeks, waiting for this very moment. My hands were calm, steadier than they had been in months. When David and I began struggling to conceive, we went through extensive testing. I opened the envelope, spreading medical reports across her flawless granite countertop like a deck of cards. The results showed I'm perfectly fertile. In fact, the doctor described me as textbook healthy. Margaret stared at the pages as if they were written in code. "David, however," I continued, my voice gaining firmness with each word, "was diagnosed with oligospermia, severely low sperm count. The specialist told us it's most likely hereditary, often passed down through maternal lines." The carving knife slipped from David's hands and clattered against the platter, the sharp sound echoing through the suffocating house. "The doctor was particularly interested in family history." I pressed on, my eyes locked on Margaret. "This condition can skip generations, but it's frequently tied to maternal influences, stress during pregnancy, medications, exposure to toxins, sometimes even emotional trauma. All of it can impact fetal development and remain invisible until adulthood." Margaret's mouth opened and closed like she was gasping for air. "I've been digging into this," I said, sliding out another stack of papers. "David told me you had a difficult pregnancy with him. Months of bed rest, heavy medication. And I couldn't help but notice." I gestured toward the wall of photographs displayed like trophies. "David is your only son out of 4 children. He's also the only one who hasn't been able to conceive." The silence pressed down on the room. I could even hear the tick of the grandfather clock down the hall. "His sisters? All of them have kids," I continued in a conversational tone. "Jessica has 3. Rebecca has twins. And even little Marie already has a baby on the way. It seems the genetic problem affects only the male line. Funny how genetics weave their way through families, isn't it?" Margaret's fingers were clamped around the countertop, her knuckles bleached white from the pressure. "Of course," I said calmly, gathering the reports back into their envelope. "We're not giving up. There are treatments. IVF with ICSI, for instance, offers very good chances with oligospermia. David's count isn't 0, it's just alarmingly low. With proper treatment, there was still a real possibility that David and I could have children." I gathered the papers back into the envelope with care, tucking them away. "But since you've been so invested in our private life, Margaret," I said evenly, "I thought it was only fair to make sure you understood something. When we do have children, they'll carry half my DNA, the part that isn't broken." Her mouth opened, then closed again without a sound. "Oh, and Margaret?" I added, smiling, truly smiling, for the first time in 3 years of enduring family gatherings. "I just recorded our little exchange. The part where you called me barren and useless, that's safely stored on my phone. In fact, I've been recording our conversations for months, building quite the archive." I held up my phone and tapped the screen. Instantly, Margaret's voice rang out, crisp and undeniable. Cooking requires a certain intuition that only real mothers possess. David's face went gray. His father drifted into the doorway, drawn by the silence. Jessica and Rebecca leaned in from the dining room, their expressions tight. "You see," I continued, addressing them all now, "the problem was never me. It never has been. I'm an accomplished marketing director. I own my own house, manage my finances, and have always treated this family with respect, even though I was treated as an outsider. I've shown up for birthdays, holidays, brought thoughtful gifts, laughed at jokes that were tired the first time I heard them, and listened to the same stories a dozen times without complaint. I've cooked, I've cleaned, I've tried. My eyes found David's. But what I will not do is allow myself to be manipulated into thinking I'm the cause of our fertility struggles, especially when you've known the truth for 6 months and still let your mother blame me." David's lips parted, but nothing came out. "I love you," I told him sincerely. "But I love myself more. And I refuse to keep being the family scapegoat just because the truth is inconvenient." Margaret was still gripping the counter as though it were the only thing keeping her upright. "As for you," I said, my tone sharp but controlled, "you have a choice. You can apologize right now in front of everyone for the constant insults and emotional abuse. You can admit that David's medical issues are not mine to bear. And you can agree to show me at least the level of courtesy you'd give a stranger. Or," I lifted the phone, "I can share these recordings with your church group, your bridge club, your book club. I'm sure they'd find the one where you suggested I must be cheating since we hadn't conceived, yet very enlightening." Her face drained of all color. "Your call," I said lightly. "But don't take too long. The turkey's getting cold, and I've got somewhere else to be." Margaret's eyes darted helplessly around the room, toward David, who stared at the floor, toward her husband, who was suddenly fascinated by the ceiling, toward her daughters, who avoided her gaze entirely. She began, faltered, and stopped. "I'm waiting," I reminded her gently. I'm sorry." The words were barely audible. "Sorry, I didn't quite catch that," I said pleasantly. "Could you speak up and maybe specify what exactly you're apologizing for?" Her hands trembled. "I'm sorry for saying the fertility problems were your fault. They're not. I know they're not. And I should have treated you better. You're my son's wife, and you're a good person. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was enough." "Thank you," I said smoothly. "See, that wasn't so hard." I walked over and kissed David on the cheek. He looked utterly stunned. "I'm going to my sister's for dessert," I told him. "You can stay here and work this out with your family, or you can come with me. But if you stay, we're going to have a serious conversation later about boundaries, respect, and what marriage really means." I grabbed my coat from the closet and headed toward the door. "Sarah, wait!" David called after me. I turned. He stood in the doorway, looking small and uncertain, younger than his 31 years. "I didn't know what to do," he whispered. "She's my mother." "She is your mother," I agreed. "But I'm your wife. And for 3 years, you've let her treat me like garbage because it was easier than standing up to her. That ends today, or I end being your wife." I walked to my car without looking back. As I pulled out of the driveway, I saw David through the window, shrugging on his coat and grabbing his keys. Moments later, he followed me to my sister's house. That night, surrounded by people who genuinely loved me, I ate pumpkin pie, played games, and laughed at jokes that were actually funny. David was quiet, but he stayed. He stayed. And when we returned home, we talked until 3 in the morning about respect, boundaries, and what our marriage needed to become. It's been 8 months since that Thanksgiving. We're in couples counseling now. David has begun standing up to his mother, not perfectly but consistently. Margaret and I will never be close, but she greets me with careful politeness these days, as though I'm something volatile that must be handled with caution. We started IVF last month. The first attempt failed, but our doctor is optimistic about the second. And when we do have children, and I believe we will, they'll grow up knowing their mother never allowed herself to be diminished. Revenge isn't always about cruelty. Sometimes it's simply about refusing to carry shame that was never yours. It's about planting your feet, lifting your chin, and saying no more, and meaning it. The voice recorder is still installed on my phone. I don't need it anymore, but I keep it. Not as a weapon, but as a reminder. I'm not responsible for protecting other people from the truth. My only responsibility is to speak it. And speaking it, I've learned, feels an awful lot like flying.